Hey guys, so I want to share a thought that I've had really for the past few days. Okay, so Florida, they have these new guidelines where they're teaching when they teach slavery, American chattel slavery. They're also pointing out the benefits that the system had for black slaves, how black slaves benefited from this, learning valuable skills. Okay. The other thing that I've noticed in the past few years is that Republicans, conservatives, see this huge conspiracy of elites of Democratic and liberal elites and Democratic and liberal business leaders being involved in this huge web of trafficking children that expands the entire globe. Okay, so let's look at this. So I'm going to connect this and hear me out. So I just want to repeat this. So on one hand, there's a large contingency of conservatives who want to say, look, there is a benefit to slavery. And this goes beyond just the politicians. You can talk to just citizens like Republicans, and they'll be like, well, it was beneficial to a lot of blacks. But then these same conservatives will say, hey, this great crime is taking place in our day, child sex trafficking. I mean, this is The Sound of Freedom, that movie. It's one of the reasons this movie has been so popular, because it kind of feeds into that. I don't want to say the conspiracy, but it feeds it, because that is a thing that happens. I mean, it technically is a conspiracy, and I don't want to say paranoia, but QAnon is born from this. All right, so let me get to the point. Okay, so the act prohibiting the importation of slaves. It was this law that was ratified March 2nd of 1807 and went into effect January 1st, 1808. And what it did is it banned the importation of slaves into the U.S. So the importation of slaves into the U.S. was banned in 1808. Now that may seem kind of confusing, because you're like, well, wait a minute. We had slavery for another 57 years after that, right? And we did have slavery for another 57 years. So what the slave owners and what they did basically is they forced female slaves to essentially produce as many children as possible, and by breeding the way you would do, a cow, a horse, or whatever, because that's the definition of chattel slavery. It was, human beings were sold and traded like property, like livestock, right? But depending on where you look, the average age in which a female enslaved person had their first child was 13. Let me say that again. Depending where you go, and sometimes the number will be as high as 19, but more likely lower than that. By some measurements, the average age of female enslaved person had their first child was 13 years old. And by the time they were 20, they were expected to have 3 or 4 children. So here, think about that. You are trading human beings, and some of those human beings are children, because a 13-year-old is a child. And 13 is the average, meaning that they were slaves who were having children at a younger age than that. As soon as they had their first period, they were probably expected to bear. So they were being trafficked. They were being sold for the purposes of sexual exploitation in its cruelest form. And they were also being trafficked to fulfill whatever twisted desires that their owners may have. So how is it that these same people who are so adamant about stopping this cabal of sex trafficking of children, seeing shadows where there may not be anything, but they're absolutely sure they're there, but then the definite thing that we have literally the receipts for, we have the documentation, we have the proof, we have even one of our founding fathers who impregnated a child, but they'll say that, well, we don't want to look at that. We want to focus on the good thing. We want to focus on the benefit. I mean, does that